one of the triggers was just standing on a field watching a lunar eclipse. And as that gradual diminution and then re-emergence of light occurred in complete silence, it was as if the materiality of what I was witnessing was more palpable because of the silence. And so to introduce words seemed to be coming at this experience in a way that was going to reduce the sheer substance of what it is that I was witnessing. And I felt drawn to just remaining silently present. And somehow, for me, paint, because it's part of the world itself, seems more embedded in the cosmos than language. And that's been a lot of the draw to making paintings subsequently. The breakthrough for me with moving into painting, I thought, occurred when I started making a rectangle, which was acknowledgedly abstract and relatively dark. And for an entire congery of reasons which I'm still exploring, at one moment, after hours of working on the surface and remaining roughly within the rectangle, the border of the canvas was left unpainted so that it was white. I came in one evening, I think, and added 2 tabs on the left-hand side of this rectangle and realized that I had created what looked like hinges. So that the rectangle, just by virtue of that, you would say, abstract addition of 2 rectangles on the left of it, which could be read as hinges, became also now a door. And so that it moved just by that addition from being an abstract representation to a fairly legible depiction of a door. And then the whole notion of what a door was opened, literally like a door, because then the question was, well, are you looking at the surface of the door, or are you looking at a doorway, or what does this door open onto? So what is your sense of what's behind the painting, and how does it act as a threshold between us and this other realm that it might give access to? Yeah, this is a door. This one, I was fascinated by trying to complicate my access to the door as if it was as alluring as it was blocking. On the back, I copied out the Kafka story, Before the Law, which is about the man who sits for his entire life at a doorway, and on the other side of the doorway is the law and the illumination of the law, so that he will finally understand what the great law is. But he's blocked, and he has to sit there in his entire life. And so this idea of capturing the back of this painting, I just copied it out by longhand, and then a photo of Kafka, and then painting it so that it has this sense of what's behind it. And I ended up doing door after door after door, and I did about 33 doors. And they're all 36 by 60 inches. And so they're pretty isomorphic. But the colors vary greatly, the textures vary greatly. And one of the things that I was doing was finding that this was a way to allow parts of my life to get into the work that hadn't been given the same kind of expression in the poems. I was listening to music while I was making these, and in fact at some point I was applying the paint in rhythm to the music. I was listening to Beethoven sonatas, and it was as if for every brush stroke there could be a note. Then what happened is I went and got the actual score of the sonata and cut little bits and pieces of it and embedded phrases of it into the actual canvas. And sometimes I would allow a tiny bit of it to remain perceptible, and other times I'd just paint over it. And but it started building up a private archive for me of musical reference. I would sometimes copy out poems longhand onto bits of paper and put that in against the canvas and then paint over that, so that I would know that somehow buried in there was a poem of John Donne or a stanza of Wallace Stevens. And there would be some strange pressure exerted from my sense of what was behind the surface of the paint, thinking that there was a voice back there or a music back there. And I would, I think, start painting as if I was trying to give form to the emotion that that poem might have for me. And in some cases, I was very aware of what the text was. I know that there's just a realm of experience that seems to be more adherent to the visual than to the verbal. And it's very hard for me to break this down because my poems are increasingly interested in coming up against the inexpressible and the margin of silence. And I feel the words almost hitting up against the unspoken and recoiling and pushing back again, whether it's just one sense of what time is or what mortality is or what historical atrocity is, something that's unspeakable, but that the language impacts and throws itself again against. And so there is a deep relation in the exploration in both media of the otherwise inexpressible, something that only that poem or that painting can make present in the world. And I don't feel that one is more, I think there's probably a division of labor in some ways. But I know that my imagination is highly visual, and so that the experience of concentration given to me by certain paintings is an experience that I've tried to recapture in poems, either by close attention to visual detail or by just finding a linguistic way to get as close as I can to a certain saturation that I love in paintings. I have to say that I'm finding more satisfaction at the moment, just sheer satisfaction, in the visual realm. And I think it's because of the physicality of the medium and the sense of just working a material. It allows more of my body into the space of making, whereas the page is this, it's a remorselessly alien to the human body domain, and to get one's words to have the kind of physicality is something that's racking and excruciating, and it's terrifically satisfying when it's happening. But when it's not, there's not the same place for free play that I've been finding in the visual, where I can just keep moving the stuff around. And words are so insistent, and they have their constituencies in meaning. And so it's as if you've declared yourself, you know, with each next on word. Whereas there's a way to remain amorphous, at least semantically, you know, while working the paint. And I just love it. What spawned this preceded the making of the door sequence. And what happened there was, since the doors were the first canvases I made, I had begun on smaller pieces before that. And I had been out in this area of West Texas near the Mexican border in a very isolated place, and was taking these very long walks, sort of 20, 30-mile walks. And I got one of those little disposable cameras and took snapshots of the landscape, you know, over a sequence of weeks, and got them back, and they were terrible. And I wasn't planning to make any visual stuff out there. I was out there to write for a couple of months. And all I had was a little bottle of whiteout. And I started whiting out these photographs until there was absolutely nothing that one could see. Except that I liked the whiteness because it had marks and it had a little impasto, and it was absurdly painstaking because I was using this little, you know, those little whiteout brushes. And I realized I was making white paintings, and I called them Erasures. And there was nothing visible on them except the little ridges and bits of rhythm and texture. But I loved it, and it was deeply satisfying. And I did a lot of these. And then I would make them into triptychs. I'd put 1, 2, 3 as if they were a kind of altarpiece of erasure, or they had in a narrative of erasure. And then I thought, well, I've got to get some color into this after a while. But again, I didn't have paints, I didn't have supplies, I didn't have anything. So I started with a blue felt tip pen, and I started introducing blue. And then I got a red felt tip pen, and I started mingling them, and they made a dark magenta black. And I loved the blackness of them. So I was making all of these tiny things the size of a snapshot, and then making sequences of these. That's what triggered me to say, okay, well, what if we started doing these big? And so the first things I was doing was just making these large rectangles of usually dark. Some of them were just completely red. Some of them were completely black. And then I started flecking them up and building up the texture with many colors. And then the door, you know, with the hinge idea. It's almost never been starting with an actual idea. Except once I got into the sequence of doors, I knew that the format would somehow produce another door. But then when that stopped, then I started cold and shifted the dimensions, and then it was really a matter of seeing what emerged in the act of making. These are notebooks, and they're just full of the crossover between drawing. This corresponds to the time. Yeah, this is December of '99. There's a variety of stuff, but I mean, this turns out to have been an image that I saw of people trying to break down a door. And it was around the time of civil war in the Balkans. And so then I would move to trying to make a poem. And it turns out that the language here, and this is just a beginning of what might be a poem or not, but it just says, you break the door, you take lives calling out elsewhere, you crowd against, say, etc., etc. So that there's an attempt to work with this in both mediums. And then I'll just, as I page through, I had a sense of a looming figure that was coming through a half door. So there would be these ways of going at things, you know, that go back and forth between language and what I'm trying to get to here is a sense of how history comes in. I was reading a book about the fall of Berlin, and so imagined a sketch of people coming in, having to pass your access to a city, having to be via a fallen person. But then I could make these more specific, so that they could include, let's say, paintings that I had discovered. At the time that I was interested in doors, I found this Goya of a madman who's been put into stock. So I just thought I'd make an ink sketch of it, because what the door could contain and entrap, and getting involved in it, I felt I was myself somehow starting to portray myself as if in the door. What happened is that after the doors, I did some canvases that were pretty much all over dark, illegible, except they had a certain richness of consistency and a certain suggestiveness. And I am interested in trying to paint states of being rather than objects, and elements rather than objects. So say air or earth or fire or water. And so that there's many that come out of a sense of the night sky, or of what might be under the surface of the earth. How would you paint a slab, let's say, of the underground, of the underworld? And this began to fascinate me. The attempt to paint the underworld is what then led me to build this up. And there's trace elements here rhythmically in the way the paint is applied that suggest tributaries or dendrites, some kind of primal domain that could as much be the night sky as it could be the underworld, and certain rhythms that could recur through it. But what happened as I dwelt in this area was that I wanted to capture something greater, and this turned out, as I put it together, to allow these shafts to be introduced, as if there was a capacity for illumination. Or since if you dwell on something that is dark, what is the counter impulse, and where does it come from in the psyche or in the planet itself? And I wanted to somehow do justice to that polarity. And the eye has to dwell on it for quite a while before the colors emerge, the way you would be accustomed to the night or accustomed to a cave. And this underworld place in which shafts of possible light existed, but might be doorways as well, led to my sense that I was really trying to paint the world of Eurydice or of Orpheus. And so this became a kind of underworld with narrative or with myth below it. And however one reads it, I don't want to overdetermine the painting, but I did want there to be this tension between luminosity and darkness, between being trapped and being led out of confinement and egress, of things being vertical or things being on a slant, being able to transgress the frame of the painting. Very many of these begin with one panel, and then if the subject seems to be expanding, I'll add a panel, and then sometimes it'll be on the right, sometimes it'll be on the left, sometimes I'll reverse them. In some instances, I have a pretty strong intuition that it's going to be a 3-panel painting. I think I was interested in high contrast in this one, and paint for 4, 5, 6 hours, 7 hours, take a quick break, paint for another 3 hours, sometimes paint, well into the night. And music is usually playing. I know this one was accompanied by Mahler's Second, which is, an enormously long thing. It's called the Resurrection Symphony, and it's got very strong contrasts within it. Because the music that I was listening to was not accompanied by words, its significance was in a way up for grabs in terms of, just traditional notions of, okay, so what is the meaning of this music? And so one was prompted to find just gestural responses to it that were as inarticulate verbally as, say, my response to the lunar eclipse. And yet a way of witnessing the music and making that witness physical and embodying my response to it, so that after having painted a door that corresponded, let's say, to my having listened to the Waldstein sonata over and over, I felt that the sonata was somehow embedded now in that door. Or if it was a piece of Mahler or Bach, was very important, because the sense of structure that gradually emerged was influenced by notions of counterpoint and antiphony and fugue. And so, yeah, the synesthetic response was really quite, I'd feel it in my arms very much and in my shoulders, the music. And it was thrilling, very mysterious. I thought for sure nobody was going to see these things. And I didn't know if I could make anything that was going to be worth seeing. Still don't. That's, ultimately not going to be up to me, but the genesis of it all was completely without the sense that this was going to be seen or be accepted as art.